kind of shifting back to kind of school, like let's say spending time in a high-level calculus class, right? It's not clear that those skills are directly going to be transferable to, say, an IT job.
Right.
Do you think there's still value in taking those in terms of critical thinking? You do talk about, classes teaching critical thinking. So should we kind of feel about transferable skills, and if you don't feel great about them, what's a better way to instill critical thinking?
Right. So here's the funny thing about economists. Economists have great contempt for psychology. Right? When I was in grad school, the number of times I heard professors say, oh, well, if you want to go and be a psychologist, you can go and read psychology. All right, I think psychology is a fantastic field, and I've learned a tremendous amount from it, and these economists who complain about it are just narrow-minded ignoramuses about the subject. But here's the funny thing. Whenever I tell economists that most people don't actually use their coursework on the job, suddenly they become psychologists and say, oh, well, they must be learning critical thinking. It must be that they're learning how to think. So you know what? The psychologists have been studying this question for 100 years. And you know what most psychologists who work on this have concluded? They concluded that there's very little sign that there is such a thing as learning how to learn or learning how to think. Teaching critical thinking is very rare. What really happens in school at best is that people learn the exact subject you teach them. People are terrible at taking something you learn in a class and then applying it in an unrelated area. Right? And these are psychologists. So this is a field called educational psychology where they measure this stuff, they do experiments on it. They really want there to be this transferable skills. And yet, generally after working on it for years, they come away shell-shocked, like I just can't find the evidence this happens. This is one of the great myths that allows people to feel like studying any subject is worthwhile. The idea that if you go and work in calculus, this will improve your critical thinking. There's actual research on this, and you don't see this. Basically, what is calculus? Studying calculus improves your calculus. It also is a good time to practice your algebra. Right, so there's a really neat study that I cite where they look at lifelong retention of algebra and geometry. All right, have you ever had a class and you did well in it and then you forgot everything you learned in the class? All right, and guess what? You're going to get older and you're going to forget even more stuff soon. Right, you're going to forget most of what you learned. All right, but this paper went and found that yes, almost everyone who goes and takes classes in algebra and geometry, by the time they're 40, they've just forgotten almost everything, with one exception. The exception is students that go on to calculus remember algebra and geometry when they're 40. And in fact, they remember it even when they're 60 and 70. All right, so basically, if what you're doing is practicing a skill a lot, well, that is one of the best ways to retain it. So doing a lot of practice extended over a long period is what gives you lifelong learning. But it's still learning of that very subject that you have. It isn't that you get great at things in general. Basically the idea that if you go and study calculus, you'll be better at everything is just wishful thinking. I would say for IT, actually, there are a lot of areas where you want calculus for IT. If you're going and doing computer graphics or something like that, how is it that you were going and figuring out the continuous movement of a dinosaur in a Jurassic Park movie? I think you're using some calculus there. You've got a curve, right? So you're going and probably you're just doing quantitative derivatives and integrals, but still, or numerical ones. But nevertheless, that is an area where it actually has some value.
Graphic design.
But basically, if you really want job skills, you got to study the very thing you're learning. That's why when you finish college, you're going to show up at a job and people are going to tell you that you don't know what you're doing. You're like, hey, I've been studying for 17 years, so how can I not know what I'm doing? Like, yeah, well, because now we're going to teach you how to really do the job. You've been just basic. Some of the things you will use, like you'll use your reading and writing, you'll use math, depending upon the job. Of course, a lot of jobs don't really use math. But most of what you had to do in school will never come up again. You can safely forget it, right? So that's that is the real world.
And then for the good students that are continuing college, how do we then optimize the experience, both in terms of determining which college to go to, let's say in-state college that's in T20 versus the Ivy League, and then also once you're in it, how do you make the most of it?
Yeah, so there's a lot of great research on this that hardly anybody reads. I try to boil it down for students in the book because I don't want it just to be an academic book. I also want it to be a book where I take academic research and then say, here's what it implies about what your best bet is. Remember, all we're doing is betting, right? You have to bet on yourself. It's a question of how to place the bets. There's no guarantees. So some of the main things to know, like I said, are that it's really important to have a high completion probability, right? If your completion probability is low, then you really should think about non-academic, non-college options. But if you're doing really well in high school, then it is very likely a good idea for you to go to college. It will pay for you, likely. And then in terms of the other questions, so like choosing your major, there's good data on how majors pay. Furthermore, it is better data than it seems because it tries to adjust for things like what your SAT scores were. So the reason why engineers make a lot of money, part of it is they got good SAT scores, and people with good SAT scores make more money. But part of it is that on top of that, engineering is additionally a especially lucrative field. So you want to look at those. So like highest earning majors: electrical engineering, CS, mechanical engineering, finance, and then economics is very close behind. Right. So and then like one majors at the bottom. Let's see. So generally, the two lowest earning majors you'll see in the data are education and fine arts. Okay, so sorry teachers, but anyway, that is the very low earning major. So that's something to know when you're choosing your major. Again, does this mean that you should definitely do the highest earning majors? No. Like, do you want to be rich and miserable? I don't. There was once a professor in my department who quit his job and he multiplied his salary 5 times. And my dad said, "Hey, could that guy get you a job?" And I told my dad, "I hope not, because I don't want to do what he's doing. His job's terrible." So yeah, like don't just go for money, but consider money. Right now, in terms of the decision that's coming up for you soon, which is should you pay top dollar to go to a fancy private school, or should you just go to UVA or someplace like that? And I'd say the general answer research is you should probably just go to UVA. It is not worth it to go to an expensive private school. Why not? Well, have you looked at how expensive those schools are? Right now, if you are from a poor family, then actually totally go to the expensive private school because you won't be paying that. And those schools have more money to offer you than UVA does. Right? And definitely apply and just see what happens. For most people, you're better off just going to your much cheaper, high-quality state school like UVA, or if you're a California resident, go to Berkeley or whatever. Why? And that is that the extra payoff for more prestigious schools is actually much overrated by people. Most of the reason why people who go to top schools do so well is because they're awesome, and we're awesome when they ride, and they would have done really well if they went to UVA too. On average, of course, it's all a bet. The main people where it might make sense for them to pay full price for a top private school, if you want to be a professor, then it might pay, because academia is so credentialist, so snobby. If you want to be like an investment banker or otherwise go to like a top Wall Street firm, if you want to be a corporate lawyer, then maybe you want to go and pay all that extra money for a top private school. The schools that I'd say it's almost crazy to go to a low quality, expensive private school. And there's tons of those. And by low quality, I just mean the students have low SAT scores. So if you go to schools like that, you are paying almost as much as Harvard, and their students do not do very well. Right? So they say, well, I really like the country club experience. Like, you like it that much? You like it that much? If you could go to UVA to go to Washington Lee or something. Washington Lee is actually pretty selective. But let's see, what's a not so selective private school? Like Lemoyne College, for example, is not so selective. So you pay private school tuition, and then your career options are not especially good. Let's see, other things to know. This is actually probably the most important. Apply to a ton of schools, because there's just a lot of randomness in the system. Randomness in admission, randomness in funding. My sons, when they were applying. So my kids were homeschooled, so I took extra responsibility for things working out for them. They also want to be professors, so I know a lot about how to direct them. But anyway, when we were applying, one of the schools that was right on the edge was Vanderbilt, and then my son was saying, I've got to write an extra essay for a merit scholarship, should I do it? And I said, yeah, I think that's a good idea. And then a few months passed, and they completely even forgot they applied to Vanderbilt, and then they got in with full scholarships to Vanderbilt. Right? Right? So, and like that was not our plan. We were like, this was not like, oh God, we really want to go to Vanderbilt. It's just like, wow, we threw a lot of dice and we got a great roll on Vanderbilt, so we'll go to Vanderbilt. Like, so that is, you know, so like basically everything else I told you could be wrong, but applied to a ton of schools, that's not wrong. That's definitely true.
Do you think a benefit of going to a top college rather than like UVA would be like the competitive environment, or is that really the same?
Right. Well, so like we've got good data on how much it pays to go to like the good state, the best state school versus a fancy private school, and basically the debate is between researchers saying maybe it'll raise your earnings by like 5 or 10%, and people saying probably not even that. Again, now of course you might go to a top school and get a fantastic job and say, hey, the private school paid. Guess what? Maybe you could have gone to UVA and also come away and saying, wow, this really paid. So like here's like, you know, this is just an example, but it's one that I know well. So my wife did not go to a fancy law school. She went to Rutgers, Newark. But she made law review, and then she was able to get a job at a top Wall Street law firm. The other people there paid for Harvard and Yale, and they had hundreds of thousands of dollars of student debt, and guess what? They had the same job as her with the same pay. Right, so that's what happened, right? And like that could easily be you, right? The idea, like, again, of course, anyone who goes to Harvard and Harvard encourages you to think that everything you have, you owe to Harvard. You don't owe everything you have. You have to Harvard. There's plenty of Harvard grads who actually do have very mediocre performance in life. And there's plenty of people from much worse ranked schools who wind up getting those top jobs too. So again, like the best thing is always to go and look at what's really happening to people right now in the jobs that you want. So especially younger people. So basically if you go and talk to people who are like 5 or 10 years ahead of you in life and find out so what's going on at your law firm, like what kinds of degrees do people actually need to get those jobs? Right? And then find out and listen to them because they know what's going on in the occupation that you're really interested in. Oh yeah, way in the back, please.
Sorry, I don't want to steal anybody else had a question. Is there a way to expand opportunity? You had mentioned that term earlier, expand opportunity from a social justice perspective, let's say, and also mitigate, if possible, credential inflation?
So possible, yes. I mean, of course, like a lot of what's going on with scholarship programs is trying to do just that, right? I'd say that a key part of it, for it to work, is they've got to be merit-based programs for people that are poor or come from poor families, because that way there's not a stigma against them. On the other hand, if you have a system where we say we're going to go and let in a lot of people from poor families who could never possibly get in here in order to give them opportunity, then what this means is, well, this person has a Harvard degree, but what should we conclude? Why are they there? Probably they're there because of a system where they just lower standards. So, and again, there is actually some interesting research on state merit-based scholarship programs where those are the ones where like it can actually be a good thing for you to say, look, I did really well in college, and I also have this merit scholarship. So that's one where it sends a good signal. On the other hand, if you're just going and letting in students that could never actually get into your school otherwise, then you can understand why employers would be skeptical when they're interviewing. So, yeah, I mean, so opening up opportunity to people that can't do math, for example. Like, you know, how can we go and get students who can't do math and engineering? Yeah, well, if you do that, you're just going to create a special class of people that people don't consider to be real engineers. And like, do you want those people building bridges anyway? Yeah, I don't think you've asked a question yet.
You said that the skills that you learn in college are non-transferable to like real life.
Well, it depends. If you're doing engineering, maybe they are. But yeah.
But yeah, if it's not for engineering or certain majors, how can you choose to go to college for?
Well, so again, remember, my story is not that college doesn't pay. My story is about why it pays. Does it pay because you learn useful skills, or does it pay because you get a stamp on your forehead? Right, so I've always believed the stamp theory. I will say since a very young age, I said, like, obviously that's the main thing that's going on. If you believe that the main reason to go is that you get stamps, why go? To get the stamps. Because I don't want the whole world to stigmatize me as someone that didn't go. I want those opportunities. And here's the thing, if I say I'm not going to go to college because it's a wasteful system, does that change the world? Does everyone say, oh my God, Bryan didn't go to college, now I guess none of us should go? No, it just is a way of shooting yourself in the foot. So to be clear, I'm not advising students to saying like it's just putting a stamp on your forehead so don't go. I'm saying, first of all, understand when you're thinking about government policy, have the more realistic view, which will then make you much more negative about funding education, right? And like, what is college for all? If the point is to go and give us even more credential inflation than we've already got, right? So, right now, so actually, this is kind of a funny thing, but when I teach my students at George Mason, I'm going to say, how many people here plan to finish your bachelor's degree and then never come back and get any other degree in your life? And it's like 10% of the students raise their hand. Yeah, this is it, I'm done. Everybody else feels like now they can't really satisfy their career ambition unless they get a further degree. I need additional degrees on top of that degree. It's like, what a dysfunctional system that you can't even be ready to go and do a job after 17 years of school.
Is there a point of education then?
Well, so there's a whole bunch of points, right? There's one point of getting the stamp on your forehead. That's a point. Like I said, like you do learn some useful things, although most of the useful things you could have learned on your own. You guys remember Zoom school?
Yes.
All right. Basically, either you're teaching yourself or you're not learning anything, right? That's the way Zoom school works. All right. Yeah. I mean, I'll say like I've never met a well-informed person who only knows what they learned in school. Well-informed people are always people who took a lot of extra effort to go and teach themselves. It's easier than ever now because you've got the world's best lecturers who are available for free on YouTube. Other reasons to go. Well, it's a place to meet a bunch of friends. Of course, if you had a job, then you can meet friends there, so that's something else you can do. For some people, it's a great time to party, get drunk. Right? A lot of students are doing that. So these are all, there's a lot of different reasons to go. The main thing I would say is just to think about what else you could be doing. What are your other options? Right? And also, how much is this going to cost? Right? If your parents are paying for everything, you might say, I don't care about the cost. Right? Anyone have cool parents who say, hey, if you just want to go and open a business, I'll give you your college tuition and you can start a business with it instead? Yeah, so there's a reason why not too many parents like that idea, which is, yeah, probably your business will be a total failure and you'll just lose the money, right? Because if you want to start a business, it's a good idea to get some actual experience in the business before you try running it. Yeah, that's common sense. My brother started a bunch of businesses that he didn't know anything about, and they all failed. So,
I'll open it up to audience questioning in a bit, but just a last question before we wrap things up on my end. Would you really say then it's a case against education, or really just a case against how we view education's utility?
Right, so I just want to sum it out as an education system. It's the system that's dysfunctional. Right? Many people wanted to argue and say, well, you're really against schooling, not against education itself. What I said is, look, first of all, I don't want to argue with people about words. I just want to use the words the way that they're usually used, and then to get down to business. The other thing I would say is that I am against this general idea that education is the most important thing in life, and it's something that's really special, and we should consider it more valuable than doing other things. So look, it has a certain function. It's really fun for a small number of people. For other people, it serves some. It is useful. It can be useful as a way of training people to do their jobs. It can be a way of certifying people, or there's probably a much cheaper ways of doing it. Before we went to college, how was it we sorted out people that were management material from people who weren't? Through apprenticeships. You hire people and you work your way up the company. That was a different approach, and I think probably overall a better and a fairer approach to say you just get a job when you're a teenager, and then we promote people who have high performance. That seems a lot more fair to me than one saying, well, since you got a Harvard degree, let's go and start you off at this really good job and see what happens. So I guess that's where I go with that.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to turn it back to the audience before we close things out. Do you guys have any last questions?
So someone who hasn't asked a question yet? Oh, yes, please.
So you were talking about high school dropouts in 1945 versus in 2022.
Yeah.
And since then, technology and innovation and perhaps even the types of jobs have increased. So would you say that could have happened because people have pursued higher education since then?
Right. So the answer is it could be. If you don't know the facts, yes. But if you know the facts, then no. All right. So here's the thing. What we see is there's a lot of credential inflation even in jobs that are technologically stagnant. We see that waiters have a lot more education than they used to. Cashiers have a lot more education than they used to. this just goes down the line. So when I talk about credential inflation, this isn't just saying that people have more education than they used to. This is saying that most of the change in education in the workforce is not explained by the fact that jobs are more technologically difficult. Most of it is explained by the fact that a given worker in a job that's existed for hundreds of years has more education than he used to. That's what's really going on. So, I mean, it's true that we do have a higher tech workforce. So, yeah, like the share of computer programs is a lot higher. But still, when you look by the numbers, that cannot explain more than a small fraction of what's happened. The main thing that has happened is that now you need a college degree to do a job that your grandparents got without a college degree. So, in other words, the education that you need to do a job has not risen nearly as much as the education that you need to get a job. A very good question. Let's see, someone who hasn't asked one yet.
So, like, with your theory about how we could, you could decrease education by making it less accessible. So, if we did that, how would, lower income students who couldn't afford college be able to, achieve, being a lawyer or something like that? Would they just have to, self-learn everything?
Right.
Just not be accessible?
So, good question. Again, so like I said, so if you actually are a good student, the amount of money available in education for scholarships is through the roof. What government, basically the government funding is there for people who are mediocre students who still want to go. Someone where you're not going to be getting any merit scholarship or anything like that. Just like you are not exceptional, right? And again, my view is that it is a bad system where mediocre students are spending all these years in school training for jobs that with the illusion they're going to be getting really good jobs. In fact, they're probably going to be getting jobs that their grandparents got without a college degree. So I just say it's better to have a system where we just stop prolonging childhood so much, and we're just less and we're just less squeamish about hurting people's feelings, honestly, right? This is one of the things I think is cruelest about high school guidance counselors. Any guidance counselors around? All right, so you get a student who's been doing really badly in all of high school. Obviously, they're going to do really poorly in a four-year college, or maybe they won't get into anyone. And then back in the 50s, you would say, look, you're not college material. Let's go and think about getting a job in plumbing or as an electrician or something like that. These days, you could get severely reprimanded for telling a student that. Instead, these days you say, oh, well, you should go to community college and get your grades up, and then you can apply to a four-year college. Even though statistically that's so unlikely, that's astronomically unlikely, right? So, it's like if there's a 3-year-old that says I'm going to be a professional basketball player, do you crush his dream when he's 3 and say, look, there's no way, kid, you're just too short? I wouldn't crush his dream when he's 3, but if he's 13 and he still has illusions about being a professional basketball player when he's below average in height, that's where it's like, okay, well, I don't want to be the person that crushes your dream, but it's just not realistic.
It's interesting in athletics and fine arts that we don't hesitate to do that, but when it comes to academic subjects, we do exactly the opposite.
Do you do it in fine arts? Parents may be like, I don't want my kid being an artist, but
right.
Are there teachers, good art teachers in high school say, look, you'll never make it as an artist, you suck?
True.
Yeah.
I guess my immediate question then is that almost realistic? To tell someone that is doing mediocre and poorly, just go get a job, when a lot of the entry-level jobs do require a college degree, like you said, with waiting, being a waiter and things like that. Is that a realistic approach?
Right. So don't get me wrong. It's only the really good restaurants where they're hiring a lot of waiters with college degrees. Now, they're still. Just think about this. So right now, about 70% of the workforce has not finished a bachelor's degree. Obviously, therefore, there are lots of jobs for people without bachelor's degrees. Right. And some of them are actually very highly paid. They're jobs where you basically learn on the job through apprenticeship. And if that kind of thing appeals to you, then totally give it a try. And also don't assume that just because it doesn't immediately appeal to you that it won't. Give things a chance. One of the things that schools have long claimed to do is that they expose students to a lot of options because you don't know what your options are in life. Unfortunately, most of the options that schools expose you to are completely unrealistic. Like, you could be a professional athlete or an artist or an historian. But in terms of realistic jobs, maybe you could be someone who, you could be a plumber, an electrician, or let's see, we're just about done. Is that right? So here's a job that many of you probably never heard of, but it actually is a fantastic job for anyone who likes math and doesn't want to spend a lot of time in school. So an actuary. I mean, if anyone has parents who are actuaries, basically these are the people that do the math for insurance companies. And while you normally do need a bachelor's degree, but it's very heavily test-based, where basically you just take one test, the first actuary exam, and then you can immediately get hired as an entry-level actuary. And then there's like 6 more tests, and you take these tests, and you can go straight to the top of the occupation with no further study, no further time in school. It's like my best friend at Princeton. He didn't like being an economic consultant, and so he became an actuary, and that was a really easy job for him. Gives him lots of free time. And it's also high paid with tons of free time. It's like 35 hours a week, plus good pay, plus you don't need an advanced degree for it.
Well, thank you so much. That will conclude the end of it.
All right, you guys are great. You all have bright futures, so make the most of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.